Hi and welcome to this podcast from Podcast Plus. Now, challenges we face worldwide include global warming, the global economy and terrorism. Jan Wiszniewski is a former Metropolitan Police officer who worked in counter-terrorism. Jan, hi.
Hi, hello.
Why was it you joined the police in the first place?
Well, originally, when I was a young man, I thought I might become an author. And I wanted to, when you're young, you want to live as many lives as you can. And I felt that if I became a police officer, I would be exposed to all these different lives, and then I might be able to write something about what I'd sort of seen and experienced. And the author bit never happened, but the experience bit did, and I enjoyed it immensely.
So that was your thinking before you joined. What did you find it was like in practice?
The best thing about the police, I think, is if you're doing it right, you are doing a good job. You're doing a job that is valuable, that is useful, that is completely necessary. You can serve people, and I did find that a lot of people in the police, the majority, have got a sort of service heart. They certainly feel compassion, and they've got a very strong protective instinct. And you can. So I think the best thing about it is you can do good, whilst being exposed to all kinds of different adventures and just variety in your daily life.
If you had to pick one thing that was the best aspect of policing, what would that be?
When I speak to old retired colleagues, we get together and over a pint of beer in the pub, and we'll always talk back to the days where we first started, and we were wearing the uniform, either walking around in a big hat or driving in a car, and just doing early, late and nights, answering 999 calls. And even now, when I dream and I become a police officer back again in my dreams, it's always back then. I'm always back to my first station with my uniform on. It's a strange thing, but that's where we all seem to return.
You then moved to Counter-terrorism Command. Now, why did you make that move?
I've done various things. I've been on what we call on borough for about 11 years. No, about 15 years. It was about half my service, and I had a young son. And I'd been recently separated, and I was trying to we were trying to run a system where we had 50% care of my son, so I couldn't do the shift work anymore. And I saw a job advertised for writing policy, and I got a job writing the custody policy for the Met, which I did for a couple of years. And then a friend of mine who I'd worked with previously at Lewisham was talking about he worked on a unit which was in counter-terrorism, and we got chatting, and he said, "Look, why don't you, if vacancies come up, I'll let you know and put in a good word for you." And I managed to get a stint guesting on this unit, and then I applied and got the job.
So, as I understand it, the four aspects of counter-terrorism strategy are pursue, protect, prepare and prevent. Could you just briefly summarise the different aspects?
Yeah, so the government's counter-terrorism policy is actually called Contest. It was brought in by a Labour government. It was continued by the Liberal Democrat Conservative Alliance government, and then it's continued under the Conservative governments of late. So it's a well-established policy, and as you say, it's the 4 Ps they call it. So the one that you would think of as counter-terrorism is called Pursue, and that is the plainclothes side of it, the counter-terrorism, but people who are detectives looking to either catch terrorists in the act of preparation for terrorist offences, or to catch terrorists and build cases against them who've perpetrated terrorist offences. The prevent side of it is to try and prevent people from becoming terrorists. So it's got challenge ideology, to protect vulnerable people, because generally speaking, the people that they use, especially for, there's been a lot of cases where they've used people who've got mental handicaps and things like that. But generally speaking, people who are lost and vulnerable, they may have been low-level criminals, drug addicts, and people pounce on them to use them for their own purposes. And the final part of the prevent strategy is to support institutions where radicalisation might occur, schools, colleges, places like that, and to try and help them to counter that view. And then the last two P's are similar, kind of linked, and that's protect and prepare. Now, I usually refer to those as the sort of uniform side of counter-terrorism. So protect is about making it more difficult for terrorists to successfully attack a building or an area. When you come out of a station entrance, for example, up in London, you'll see big steel bollards around the entrance. Now that's new to me and my era, and that was to do with just preventing a car from having the opportunity from ramming into a large group of people. What the government through the police have tried to do is make it more difficult to achieve an aim of hitting a lot of people. So protect is all about that target hardening, whether it's so the explosive sniffer dogs that come under protect. That's all making it more difficult to make the attack. And prepare, the final one, is if there is an attack, how can we make it so that attack is as least effective as possible? So how can we make it so that fewer lives are lost and there's less damage to buildings? So, for example, the Metropolitan Police, purchased and stored dozens and dozens of first aid kits around London in locations where if you were a police officer on the beat and there was an explosion around the corner from where you were, you could run to somewhere. It may be a local hotel, it might be a local 24-hour petrol garage. Run there, they would hand you over this great big holdall full of first aid kits, and you would run down to the scene of where it was. And those saved a lot of lives on London Bridge. When the London Bridge attack happened, attack on Westminster, they saved a lot of lives then. That was the one I have knowledge of, but I'm sure they've saved lives elsewhere as well.
Do you think that those are effective policies? They work in practice?
But they've been remarkably effective. I mean, governments, when they come in, tend to look at ways to rebadge things at the very least. And they've survived 4 changes of government. So they're pretty good. They're pretty effective. They work well. The difficulty is, if there's someone sitting alone in a bedroom, they've got to the stage where drugs used to be fun, they're no longer fun. They're just, they're just trying to keep you at a level. You're disillusioned with life. All the things that life promised you haven't come to fruition. You're radicalized by watching violent videos online. Maybe you find that an ideology, whether it's Islamic fundamentalism or whether it's far-right ideologies, you're radicalized and you suddenly think, you know what, my life would have been okay if it hadn't been for them, those people. And all of a sudden, you don't feel you've got anything to live for, but except for the fact that you might be able to, in some way, become a hero or a martyr or whatever it is. And if you then go out and decide to do something, there's not a lot anyone can do to stop that from happening, if it's just a one person. But strangely, when terrorism became very prevalent, the newspaper industry is an industry, it sells papers. And if somebody stabbing 2 people in a street in Dusseldorf isn't interesting to readers, it's not making the news. And so terrorists become a victim of their own success, and they have to become more and more dramatic to try and achieve what they want, and that is newspaper coverage and terror. And so the one-off individual, if he wants to make an impact, then has to try and find like-minded people. And as soon as he starts doing that, then he becomes vulnerable to interception and arrest.
it strikes me that the members of the public have been very resilient. I'm thinking particularly of the other incident on London Bridge, where someone tried an attack, and it was members of the public initially, one famously with a narwhal bone, who tackled them. Do you get the sense that members of the public are resilient in this area and work well with the police to tackle terrorism?
People are amazingly resilient. Human beings are amazingly resilient. And I remember after one particular attack, which I've been working on all day, and it was quite shocking. I think it might have even been the London Bridge attack. And I went home that night, and there were people on the trains and on the station. There was no atmosphere of difference. Didn't appear to be anything different about them. They were looking at their phones and looking at the paper, looking bored, and I just thought, you know what? It's almost it washes over people, this sort of thing. Now, when there is an attack actually occurring, we have found that the training has. I've spoken to shopkeepers who say that particular attack on London Bridge. I spoke to a shopkeeper I know in Borough Market, and he said because of the training we'd had, the Protect training, we immediately implemented a lockdown. We got our customers in. We knew what we were doing. Put the shutters down. Everyone was calm. He runs actually a fabulous cheese shop in the Borough Market, so those customers were well looked after while they were locked in. Just while they found out what was going on. As it happened, there was no threat and danger to them. It's definitely worth it, and that does improve the reaction that people have.
You attend St Mildred's Church. How did your Christian faith relate to your work as a police officer and in counter-terrorism?
When I first became a Christian, I went to a church, and there was a feeling that I would be asked to do all kinds of nefarious things, that corruption or whatever, and I never really found that, if I'm honest. The challenges are the same challenges you'll get if you're a security guard or if you're an accountant, whatever it is. And the challenges are always around morality. And it's hard to be a Christian in the world, and just to try and hold to a moral standard, whether it's about there's someone you really don't like in the office and they're a really unpleasant person, and someone comes over to you with gossip. It's really hard not to pass that on because you don't like that person. They're a poisonous influence, and if everyone could dislike them, they could be isolated, and then that would stop this poisonous influence. But you know what? It's hard to say. That's not going any further as far as I'm concerned. That's going to stay with me, those are the challenges that every Christian and everyone who's got a kind of moral compass will face. It's not the big things that you think it might be. I had some advice from a Christian when I joined, and he said to me, there will be things that you'll be asked to do that might horrify people from your church, and there'll be things that you won't do that might horrify your colleagues. But in the end, it will be you standing before God, you explaining why you did things. So you have to make sure you have your own firm grip on the gospel. The gospel is personal to us. We have a personal relationship with Jesus and a personal relationship with God, and make sure that is firm. And then you have to apply it to every situation you come against. And if you make the mistakes, and you will, then you have to go to God and say, I messed up there, and I'm sorry. I understand that. I'll try and not do that again and change it, and you'll improve and you'll get stronger. And do you know what? 10 years later, I was speaking to a colleague who was a new colleague, a young Christian, saying exactly the same thing to him. And the next time I saw him, he was a superintendent somewhere, so he'd done all right. But yeah, that's it's about, as a Christian, you have a personal relationship with God, and you must approach your life, whatever you're doing, and that relationship should be influencing the way you live.
Would you recommend policing as a career?
I would. There's a phrase that police officers use. I'll paraphrase it slightly. The job's screwed, they say, and they've been saying it. I'm reliably informed for at least 100 years, probably longer than that. Would I join it now if I was a young man? I would do. And there are loads of young men and women. I mean, to me, there were boys and girls. I was working as an inspector in a custody suite, and they looked like boys and girls coming through the door who were brave. I would listen to them recount how they'd made the arrest, and I would just think, that's so brave. You know, a young boy and a young girl stopping a car of 4 people in a dangerous area of London, finding knives. And I would just think, they're still out there being brave, putting their lives on the line to protect people they don't even know. And for them, not only is it rewarding, but actually it's exciting. When you walk in the door and put on your uniform, you've got no idea what that day is going to throw at you. And that gives it an essence, that gives it an edge that is exciting, and you learn about humanity, you learn about life. It's a great thing. It's a great thing.
Jan, thank you.
Thanks very much, Bill.